The Hayes kids went to Mitchell School because the district border was Central Avenue. I was friends with Juanita, Janice, and Dixie Hayes. Juanita, 7 years older than I, taught me to swim in the nearby canal. Janice was 2 years older than me, and Dixie was 3 years younger. My mother drove our 37 Plymouth to the local American Sunday School at Mitchell School each Sunday and stopped to pick up the Hayes girls and Mrs. Hayes, who became believers. I just talked to Dixie last evening, and she told me to be sure to include this in my story, as that was a turning point in her life. Later, Mom took us girls to be baptized at Beulah Covenant Church in Turlock. Mom and Mabel Turner were very active in the community, inviting people to church by doing regular calling. I don't hear people do that kind of thing nowadays. They taught Sunday school and organized 2-week Bible schools in the summer. My mom always made up baskets of food for poor people at Christmas and used her nursing skills to help the nearby people. The American Sunday School Union organization held a camp for kids every summer. Mr. Brown, who was the missionary and headed the many Sunday schools from Sacramento to Merced, called on Mom to be the nurse for our camping week each summer. I remember these wonderful times of singing and learning and playing each summer. We had opportunities to accept Christ and let him guide us. It was a very formative time. I loved sleeping out on the ground, making our beds with pine needles and making paths with stones for a prize each day. I learned to memorize scripture both at Sunday school and Bible school each summer. I gave my life to Jesus through this ministry. Mom loved to have fun, but also had to work very hard, earning part of the living for us on the farm. Our first house didn't have a bathroom, and since she liked to be modern, my father built onto our house by raising up the roof and adding a kitchen, bedroom, and bathroom and back porch. She was a good cook and taught me to make pies and roasts and biscuits and gravy. She used cream as shortening for her baking. No wonder I was chubby. Mom always felt she was fat and was verbally abused as a child, being called the fat girl from Africa. She then was always chiding me for being fat. It was a negative idea that is difficult to overcome. Her childhood was spent moving from home to home, sometimes twice in 1 year, and the lack of friends as a child and insecurities affected her all her life. She attended 18 grade schools and 4 high schools. In her marriage to my dad, she really only lived in 2 places, rural Turlock and in the town of Turlock on Minaret Street. She was an OB nurse at Emmanuel Hospital for 27 years, and people would stop her on the street to thank her for her kindness to them while having their baby. When I was in college, she and Daddy decided to sell the farm to the Turner's son, Lawrence, and his wife, Evelyn, and moved to a new home where they lived for some 30 years. Daddy was the head maintenance man at Emmanuel Hospital. He loved that job. Mom sold the Minaret Street house after Daddy died in 1983. She moved to Covenant Village of Turlock, where she was very happy, enjoying her own apartment, then assisted living, and finally 8 months in a nursing home. Her eyesight failed the last few years, but her spirit was as strong as ever. Max, my husband, and I drove up the 400 miles to see her often. He would load her into the car and put the wheelchair into the trunk, and away we would go. Mom had angina for at least 30 years and was always afraid she would die during a spell, but God gave her over 98 years. The last thing I remember was special. 2 weeks before her death, when we came to Turlock, she said, "I want to go somewhere." By this time, she was very frail and blind, and I said, "Mom, I'm not sure you can do it." To which she replied, "You two just want to go by yourself and have fun." We took her. My brother, who had MS, was in a nursing home in Modesto, so we took her to see him, and then she wanted biscuits and gravy at our favorite restaurant. I fed her that special meal. 2 weeks later, the nursing home called to say she wasn't good, so we were there when she died. I had said to her, "Mom, do you want me to pray with you?" And I did. At the end of my prayer, she said, "And make me well." She was quite a lady. Her funeral was a time of rejoicing and reminiscing with my many old friends. She hadn't been able to go to the Evangelical Free Church where she and Daddy had attended, so had a special chaplain, Johnny Boswell, who conducted the service. She loved pink, and we buried her in her favorite pink dress she had found as a bargain at a thrift store. She had told me, "See this pretty dress? It's for you know what." A young man who was a nurse's assistant at the nursing home had found that lovely dress in her closet and put it on her one day, but she wanted to save it for her special day in her casket. I ordered a beautiful nosegay of pink roses to be above her head, and she is buried with my dad in the Turlock Cemetery. But most importantly, her life was given to Jesus, and she is rejoicing with him now in a gown of his glory. I have something else. I'm sorry, this is a little lengthy, but I didn't know it was going to be this lengthy. You know, when you start, you just don't know. I found, what triggered this off this week was that I cleaned out a cupboard, and I found in there all the cards that people had given me for her funeral. And in there were all my notes, because I had to plan the funeral then. In fact, I had to go to the thrift store and buy Max a coat and a tie, because we had gone up there, and a shirt. We had gone up there not realizing she was going to die then. Okay, so my daughter, who lives in Pennsylvania, couldn't come to the wedding, and she was ill and she couldn't come, and so she dictated this to me for me to read at my mother's funeral. And this is Grandma's memory, a story about Grandma. This is my daughter writing now. I remember Grandma saying several times that she never expected to live as long as she had, and that she blessed God for her long life, but I always knew Grandma would live to a ripe old age, even when I was very young. One time when I was only 8 years old and over at Grandma's house, we were all in the kitchen. I don't remember what we were talking about, but she made an offhanded comment about someday when I won't be here anymore. This shocked my 8-year-old soul, not because I didn't know about death, but because I couldn't imagine being without Grandma anymore soon. "Oh no, Grandma," I exclaimed, "you're going to live for a long time yet." I thought hard for a minute, calculating what was a really, really long time. I thought of a representative number. "You're going to live for at least 8 more years." I said, ever so earnestly, I couldn't understand why Grandma burst out laughing and then kept laughing for a while every time she looked at me. In fact, I was rather offended. After all, 8 years was the span of my entire lifetime. That had seemed like a pretty good, far distant number to me. I had only been trying to console her. I now know that Grandma was only 60 years old at the time, because I had reassured her that she would live until she was at least 68. That was 38 years ago. Way to go, Grandma. We're glad we had you with us as long as we did. I'll always remember you, whatever age I get to be. Love, Becky. Another memory, I remember sitting around after Christmas dinner one day in the 80s talking about the Christian doctrine of the resurrection. Todd's my son, Todd and I were already